Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Tonight we are going to make a German beef and noodle stew with some homemade soft pretzels. So let's start by getting our beef cubed up. This is a chuck roast. I'm going to cube it up. I'm going to take out the fat. We'll season it, and then we're going to saute it off in our pan, and then we'll remove it and we'll work on the rest of our stew, and we'll add this in at the end after we've kind of sauteed it off for this. But first, we're going to cut through our chuck roast here, and I'm going to do good about like 1 inch size cubes, give or take a couple centimeters. Since I am using a chuck roast, I am going to trim out any big chunks of fat, because with the stew, that fat is not going to reduce down at all, and will just be very rubbery. So we're going to cut it off. It's different from doing a chuck roast in the oven where that fat is in the high heat and it can reduce down. But for this, we're going to simply take it off, so we have a better end product. So just cut a little bit here. I'm going to take out this middle piece of fat as well. And the beauty is that that fat actually comes off fairly easy. And then I'm just going to cube it up here. Again, about like 1 inch by 1 inch pieces for this, so that we'll have some just nice good chunks of beef in our stew. Get this down. And then as far as our seasoning before we saute it up, I'm going to give it a nice coating of onion powder, black pepper, garlic salt, and a little bit of thyme. So again, just really simple spices, but I think it's just going to be lovely. And then in my oven, I have my dough proofing for our soft pretzels right now. And we're going to use that. We'll roll those out, and then we'll give them a quick boil and pop them in the oven to bake off. So kind of a German, inspired meal tonight. I was going to go with a Moroccan lamb dish, but I realized I was out of rice. So I decided to save that for another day. Okay, getting these guys all cubed off. Now, when we saute these off in our pan, what we're going to want to do is make sure we don't overcook them, because overcooking them is going to make them really tough. And we want them to be nice and tender in this stew. So we're just going to really sear them off on both sides. And then as they sit, as they're resting out after we take them off, they will continue to cook to about that perfect, medium rare. And then we'll throw them back in the soup for just a few more minutes of cooking. Here we go. So almost done here. But again, let's trim off the fat on it. There. And there. It's been such a calm day today. I didn't have any sports or anything like that, so I got caught up on laundry, which is always a monumental task in this house. With 5 kids and lots of different sports, we have so much laundry. It's just insane how much they just produce.
Yeah, question. What type of meat is that?
So this is a chuck roast, which is lovely, I find, in stews. It has a nice marbling to it. It does have that big fat vein, which is what I'm cutting out, but it is a really tender cut of beef. So we're going to use it in here. But with that, since we're not going to have it on such high heat in the oven, you do want to cut out this fat. You could definitely use pre-cut up stew meat if you want. The only thing with stew meat that I have found is you're going to get some tougher bits in there, because stew meat is essentially just whatever the leftover scraps are when the butcher is kind of cutting up the meat for for the grocery store. So sometimes you'll definitely get pieces of chuck roast in there, but you could get, a round and London broil. So I find chuck roast is my favorite to use. Here we go. And don't think that by trimming off the fat, you're wasting like good meat and whatnot. You're not, because that fat is just going to be like pure rubber when it cooks up, just because it's not going to cook it in a way that you can reduce it down and get that fat out, or like get it to nice grizzle on it. Okay, down to our last little few chunks here. And then we're going to give a nice dusting over of onion powder, garlic, salt, dried thyme, and black pepper. And then we're going to saute all this off to give it a great sear on both sides. Okay, I think I've got these last pieces down. And for the most part, and it's okay if you have like a little bit of fat here and there. Again, we want to get the majority of it off. And this was about, I want to say about a 4-pound roast. Okay. Dry my hands here. Let's get our oil heating up to start searing this off. I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil in here, which should be just about the end of this bottle. And now we're going to kind of season it off, and then I'll kind of coat it. We're going to use some dried onion powder and give a generous amount of it. It'll probably be about 2 tablespoons or so.
Yeah, question. Are the pretzels sourdough?
They are not sourdough. It's so funny. So I've always thought about testing out and doing sourdough recipe, but my son, who is like, doesn't care for sourdough as much, he was like, you cannot change your pretzel recipe because it's one of his favorites. So I told him I would never change it, but I might try other, variations. So this is just a basic yeast dough. And my pretzels, they're not like German pretzels, which are hard and crunchy on the outside. These are very soft. Think of like Annie Ann's and Pretzel Time. We're going to put about a tablespoon of garlic salt on here. And then we're going to shake over about a teaspoon or so of black pepper. And then some dried thyme, about a teaspoon of dried thyme. There we go. And let me grab some tongs here. And then we're just going to thoroughly coat all of them on our cutting board. Pick up all those dried herbs in here. Make sure we kind of coat them up. You could also do this with your hands if you want to as well. But just kind of twisting it around. Ooh, almost lost a guy. There we go. And then we will start popping these in there. I'm not going to just throw them all in there at one time, because if you do that, what will happen is it's going to bring down the temperature of your pan, which is going to cause none of the meat to get a good sear on it. And then they'll seize up, let all their juices out and become tough. So we'll do it in batches. And while we're doing them in batches, we can roll out our pretzels and get those ready to bake up in the oven. Okay, so these look pretty coated, and let my oil heat up just a bit more before we start dropping these guys off into it, because I want my oil to be nice and hot for this. So I'm going to take out of my oven here that I have proofing is my yeast pretzel dough for this. I believe I have this as a free recipe card for everybody that I posted back in the spring. This is definitely a family favorite here. So we're going to pop this whole big log out, I should say, of dough. And I'm going to start by just cutting it up into equal portions. For my pretzels, sometimes I make big ones, sometimes I make smaller ones. I'm going to try to make 16 pretzels here, or maybe 12. We'll see. I like to go see how I'm trimming them off and see how it works. But try to just portion out your dough as equal as possible. These are going to be a lot bigger. They're going to puff up. So don't think they're going to be small pretzels by any means. Sometimes I make really big pretzels, and then I'll have just like 9. But we're going to get through here. So this, again, is just a really simple yeast dough. I made it, so I started out with 1.5 cups of warm water that you then add in a tablespoon of yeast and 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. You let it foam for about 5 minutes. And then you, let's get our meat in here now. Then you're going to add in 2 teaspoons of salt, 4 tablespoons of melted butter, and 4 cups of flour. You knead all of that together, and then you let it rise. until now. Okay, we're gonna add in our bits of our thing. But again, I do have a recipe card for that for everybody. You'll have to do some digging on there, but probably gave that out in the spring. And also, we do upload all of our videos to the link on the page, so you can always recreate our recipes by just watching for that. But that is, I believe, a freebie we gave for everyone. Okay, I've got I probably put one more piece of meat in there. We're gonna let it saute on half, and then we'll flip it around, and then we'll get the other half batch going. Okay, now that we have our dough cut up here, this is always the fun part. A lot of times I get my little helpers to help me with this. You want a parchment paper lined baking sheet. I'm using my big baking sheet here because this is going to allow me to fit them all on there. So just roll it nice and long. Now I'm going to tell you, I don't necessarily do the traditional pretzel shaping because I feel like it's just too much work. So I'm going to do my twist and pull through, which is more like a pretzel knot. But I have mastered this technique, which goes so much faster than shaping the individual ones, but you could definitely take the time to shape them if you want, which is like, you got to do a little twist and then you kind of pull it through. And so here's like the traditional one. It's a lot harder than my little twist and pull for it. So I like to just do mine because when I'm cooking, I like to whip these guys out pretty fast. So I just kind of hold it and then I do a little twirl around it and pull it through. And the reason I like this method is because when I'm boiling them, they actually stay together much better than the traditional method. It's just easier to maneuver. Here we go. We'll do a couple. I'll do half and half for you guys, so we can have a little bit of everything. I'm going to tuck them underneath. That way you'll have a little bit of keeps it together too. And then we'll roll out a few more. And then we're going to turn our meat over and let it saute on the other side. There we go. So again, I'm going to turn my Dutch oven down to about a 6 now that it's nice and hot. And we're going to flip all of these pieces over. Again, we don't want to overcook them. We want them to get a nice sear on each side, but still have a nice tender pink middle. The onion powder on here is going to really give it a lovely, like a brownish kind of crispy edge on it, which will be fantastic. Okay. Get these guys kind of all twisted over, and then after these have sauteed through, we will remove them and put the next batch in. We are going to keep all of our meat out until the very end when we add it into our stew to simmer for a little bit, because if you leave it in, what will happen is it's going to make it very tough. So add it back in towards the end to keep it nice and tender. That way you don't have to do a super long cook on your stew. Let's get these guys flipped in through. I'm going to see. We'll do 4 rows, 4 in each row. Sometimes they end up a little bit crazy on there. Let me roll this guy. We'll do another couple of traditional ones too. You know, it's always fun. Like, I feel like through time, you always like experiment with what's going to go faster or quicker. And so you'll find ways to make little shortcuts just to make it a little bit easier. Now these guys, when after you boil them, you're going to bake them at 450 for about 8 minutes, and they are going to puff up a good deal. So just think they're going to be much bigger than this when you finish. Let's get these. This guy is a cute little tiny one. And I'm going to get this one rolled out, and then we will get our meat out and put our next batch in. So when you're rolling this out, you want to roll it to about 18 inches long. That way you can really work with it for it. If you roll it out too short, it won't get the good puff up in the edges that you need. Okay. Let's give this a good stir. We're going to get our first kind of batch of our meat out. And again, I still want them to be nice and kind of reddish pink inside, so you don't want to overcook our meat because as they sit on this plate, they have that residual heat, which is going to continue to cook them. And then we will be throwing them back into our stew at the end, which will then cook it again a little bit more. So just don't overcook your meat right now, or you'll have more tough meat. Okay, get this first batch out, then we'll throw the rest in. And then we'll have this beautiful kind of drippings in here to saute off our veggies and whatnot. So let's add these guys all in here. And then we should be done with our meat cutting board for this. Now we'll be back to rolling out our pretzels in just a second. The trick with our pretzels to get that really final mute is to make sure that you boil it in water with a little bit of baking soda. Now, I don't do the traditional ways with lye, which I don't use lye. I don't want to have to buy another crazy ingredient that I don't use often, but it's also caustic. So I use baking soda, which gives you that a little bit of that nice chewy edges as well as the boiling it. And boiling it is crucial for your pretzels. You've got to boil it, just like with bagels. Okay, let's roll this guy out and put it in. We'll get these all kind of growing on there. I do have my water on low simmering, but when I'm ready to boil these off, I will turn it up to high because you want it on a high boil. You're going to boil each pretzel for about 30 seconds. So it's going to be about, I will say 30 to 40 seconds. It's about 20 seconds on each side. And that way they'll get that nice, good, chewy crust, but it will still be very soft and tender on the inside. There we go. And then our last one, we'll do half and half. Half my crazy ones, half the pretty pretzels. Okay, again, just roll it out. And you don't need to have oiled hands or anything like this. Your dough should be, sticky or not sticky enough that it sticks to your hands. So you don't need to worry about that.
You have a question? Do you prefer a gas or electric stove?
I get that, question. I always thought I preferred a gas stove. I grew up with a gas stove. But the first house we bought and then the house we live in now, we have electric. And I will say, while there are benefits to the gas stove, the one thing about electric that I love is it is very consistent. I know exactly how things are going to cook, how long it's going to take, where with a gas stove, there's a little bit of ambiguity to it, depending on your flame and whatnot, and how much it's touching your pot or pan. So I've come to really like my electric. Do I think gas stoves are gorgeous and beautiful? Yes. And I really wish that they made electric stoves that were bigger than the traditional, 30-inch or 36-inch ones. I really wanted a really big one with an extra set of burners, but they don't make it. They make commercial ones, but they don't make like ones that you can really buy. I think you just get used to it. I will say one thing I definitely love over is the electric oven. Again, because it's consistent in the cooking over the gas oven. So, I know I might be like the only person out there, but I really do like an electric oven and electric stove. It's always funny because whenever I go over to my parents' house and I have to cook on their stove, I'm always like, why isn't this working the way it's supposed to? Because it's gas, and gas cooks a little bit different. Okay, let's get our meat flipped. I'm going to start turning up my water to get it to a good boil here for this. We're going to flip our meat over. And again, we want it to have a good sear on both sides, but still kind of pinkish red in the middle, because we don't want to overcook it now since it's going to rest and continue cooking. And we're going to be throwing it back into our stew at the end. There we go. Let me get these flipped over. Perfect. And one more. Okay. I've got my water here. I'm turning it back up to a boil. I'm going to add in my baking soda. You want about 1/4 of a cup of baking soda in here. So I'm just going to shake it. I'll just use up the last of it. And this is, again, going to give you that pretzel kind of, it's not a true crunch on it, so it's not like live, but it gives you a bit of more of a chewy thing and a little bit of that pretzel taste to it. Okay, let me set this here. And let's start prepping up our onion, because once we get this meat out, we are going to throw our onion in there to saute up. So I have one, pretty big, good size yellow onion here. Let's peel off this whole kind of outer layer. And then I'm just going to do a simple little dice on it, so that I'll have nice little smaller pieces of onion in my stew. Doesn't have to be super small, but just nice, good size ones so you get a little bit of onion throughout. There we go. And perfect. So I'll have that ready for when I need to toss that in. And while we're waiting, let's get a couple more things prepped, because my water's not quite at a boil yet. And I've got 4 carrots that we're going to peel up, and I'm going to have and then give them a good dice. But we want to take off the carrots. Our stew, we're going to keep it really simple. I've got some homemade pasta over there that we'll cut into noodles. It was the leftover pasta from yesterday when we made our little, homemade pasta and pasta sauce. And I was like, oh, you know what? Beef and noodle soup sounds delicious. Let's use our leftover little bit for that, because you don't need a whole lot of noodle for beef and noodle soup. And then we're just going to keep it simple with carrots, onions, celery, green onions, tomatoes as like the vegetable base for our stew. We're going to have a rich kind of a beefy tomato broth to it, or beefy tomato stew like broth. So not super thin, but a little bit of a thickness to it, which kind of will stick onto the noodles as they, cook. Okay, let's give these a quick toss, since they're just about ready to pop out here. Again, we're just doing a quick saute off on all sides. And beautiful. Let's see our water. Once and going again to a nice big high boil, you want to put it in. You don't want it low. You need it boiling high for the pretzels. So we'll start prepping our carrots here. So I'm just going to cut them in half, and just nice small little bits of carrots. That will get nice and tender, but will still be lovely in here. I feel like, traditional, you have beef stew, which is like your potatoes, carrots, onions, a lot of times mushrooms or whatnot. But I feel like you can actually do beef stew in so many different ways, or beef and vegetable soup with a chuck roast, that each one can have very unique flavors that aren't quite the same, but adds a lot of variety to it. Okay, let's get these off. And I think I'm going to take my meat out now. And get our last little bits out. Again, you don't want to overcook them. You want them to still be a little bit pink inside, pink, a little bit red inside, so that they're nice and tender when we throw them back in. Beautiful.
Do you ever add parsnips to a stew?
I do. I actually really like parsnips. Now, a lot of times I'll make like a beef and root vegetable stew. The one thing with parsnips is they do add a lemony flavor to the broth. And so I absolutely love them. But whenever I make a stew with parsnips in it, my older son does not like lemons. And he's like, did you add lemon to this? And I'm like, there's no lemon in it. It's the parsnips. And he goes, are you sure? They taste lemony to me. Let's add in our onions. But yes, parsnips are wonderful. I absolutely love them. For those who don't know what they are, they look kind of like a white carrot. They are a root vegetable. They have a nice, somewhat lemony flavor to them, which just makes them absolutely lovely. I'm going to turn this down nice and low. Let's see if we add a little bit more oil in here. Use up the last of this, about another teaspoon or so. And then let's finish up cutting up our carrots. And then we should have, our water should be nice and boiling for us to start boiling off our pretzels. Now we'll boil our pretzels off, then we will bake them. So we've got to do both. So it's kind of two-part steps. The boiling is going to give you that nice chewier skin on it, seals in that moisture, so it keeps it nice and, you know, like a very tender bread inside the pretzel. And then the baking, of course, gives it that second rise, makes it soft and delicious. Now, one thing, though, if you make homemade pretzels, you've got to have pretzel salt. You can't just use regular salt for it. Regular salt is way too salty. Pretzel salt has essentially been like salt that has been watered to it, then re-dehydrated, so you get these flakes that aren't so salty that you can put on there. Regular salt, you'll just make a really, really salty pretzel. Let's get this. And it looks like our water's got a nice boil to it, so we'll be able to start dropping those. So let's get these carrots ready so that when our onions are nice and sauteed, we can throw in our garlic and then throw in our carrots. And then we'll add in some celery after that. Give a good little stir here. Okay, now that we have a nice and lovely boil going on here, let me grab my slotted kind of spoon spatula here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just drop these in. And I can do about 4 at a time before it gets a little too crazy in there. You just need enough for all of them to kind of float on top. And then we're going to let this happen for about 20 seconds. And then we're going to poke them, flip them over, and boil them for about 20 seconds on the other side. Because you want to make sure you get that nice kind of chewy crust on both sides. So you need to make sure you've got the boil there. But again, this is not just plain water. It's water with baking soda in it. So now we're going to do our little poke. So you just literally poke it with your little spatula here. And then the reason you want slotted is when you take it out, all of that water will then drip down, and then we can put it back on our baking sheet. It does, when you boil it, it does cause it to puff up more, which is wonderful. It will give you a little bit of a dimpled effect, but when you bake it, that dimpled effect will go away. Let me get a spatula out for our soup as well. Give this our onions and stir these. We've got our nice little tasty little meat drippings in there, which will add, again, just a delicious flavor to our broth. Okay, let's get these guys out. Nice little shake. And I'm going to actually turn them sideways so that they'll all fit on here. Now I'm using my 1.5-sheet pan, which is going to allow me to fit all of 16 of these pretzels on it. If you're using a regular baking sheet, you'll probably have to split into 2 for this recipe, which is why I love my big baking sheet, because I like baking on the top level, where just one level instead of having, 2 baking sheets, because that bottom one never gets the same amount of temperature and heat. And so it stays in a little bit longer and just doesn't cook up quite as nice as the top sheet. So again, 20 seconds, then we'll do our little poke over and then do 20 seconds again for this. There we go. And luckily, these are pretty hardy, so if you do 30 seconds on accident, it's not a big deal on there. So we'll poke these over. And what I like to do, so I know which ones I've poked, is I try to put them all facing the same way on there. That way, when I'm poking them over, I have it there for it. Okay. And just about. Let's poke in. I've got my onions here. Let's add in a little bit of garlic and then we can fish that last bit out. Let me grab a spoon. We're going to put in about a teaspoon and a half of garlic into our stew here. Give it a good stir and then let's fish out our pretzels. Okay. And as you can see, if you look at the ones that I've pulled out, they are much bigger in size than the ones that I haven't dropped in yet. And that just shows you how much they're puffing up. And then they will continue to puff up when we put them in the oven to bake.
You have a question, what are they boiling in?
They're boiling in a mixture of water and baking soda. So I filled up my pot up 3/4 of water, and then I added 1/4 cup of baking soda in. And that is going to help kind of give them that nice chewy texture of that soft pretzel for it. Okay. Let's pop these guys over.
And do these have yeast in them?
These are a yeast pretzel. These are my like traditional pretzels that I've been told by my son that I can never change to sourdough because he loves them so much. But I did give this recipe card out for everybody back in the spring, so you'll have to do some digging. But we definitely have it there so you can make it on your own at home. They're really simple. Don't feel like they're daunting. Don't feel like boiling and taking them out is a scary thing. It's really not. And it's much more simple than you are, but these are definitely a favorite in our family. I'm going to drop these guys in. Get our last little boil on them. I'm going to do a little bit of a rearranging because I've got a fatter one right here. I'm going to just slide it with a skinnier one so I have just enough room because I know that these are going to puff up and be a little bit bigger as they bake. And then before we pop these in the oven, we are going to brush them with an egg wash mixture. So we're going to beat up 1 egg with about a teaspoon or so of water. And then we'll brush it over and we'll bake it. I always put my salt on afterwards instead of baking it on. That way my kids can choose whether they want a salty pretzel or a pretzel with cinnamon sugar, which is a big hit in our house. Okay. So we're going to let them kind of boil up here, but let's get our carrots in. We've got that garlic kind of cooking into our mixture. We've got our 4 carrots that we peeled and diced up, and this is going to be for our German beef and noodle stew. So I'm going to give us a nice stir, coat it up with all those little meat drippings in there and those little spices. There we go. And then let's get these last guys out. And we'll slide them right here on our parchment paper. It is, I always say bake them on parchment paper because then you don't have to worry about them sticking to it. Just makes it so much easier. Okay. So we've got all of ours here. I'm going to get rid of my water. And now we're going to whisk together 1 egg with a little bit of water, about, a teaspoon, or a little more. I just do a little splash of water. Whisk it together. And then we're going to brush this over our pretzel to give it a kind of shiny finish to it. And a little bit of banging. There we go. It doesn't need a whole lot. 1 egg will do. You're not even going to use half of this mixture. But this is going to give it a nice shine. So just brush it over. Kind of, just like when you make like a brioche bread or whatnot and you have that nice little shiny kind of coating. That's what this is going to do to it. There we go. And then these bake up really fast, but you bake them in a hot oven. So I'm going to turn my oven to I have it on preheated at 450, and it bakes for just about 8 minutes. So we've got
And you
this.
have a question, is there pretzel recipe posted?
I do have this as a free recipe that I gave out to everybody out in the spring. So you'll have to just go do some digging through on our page, but you can definitely find it there. It's super simple to make. It does have about an hour resting time or proofing time because these are yeast ones. So they do take a minute for that but they're actually really easy to make, to do. And they are a favorite. Okay, let's get these last ones kind of coated here. And then I'll get ready to pop these in the oven in just a second. We're gonna give our stew a quick stir first. Okay, got my carrots sauteing up nicely. And remember, our pretzels only need about 8 minutes, so I'm going to pop them in just a second, but I want to get the rest of my vegetables, like my celery, in here. So I've got about, I want to say, six or so celery stalks, not full ones. So this would be closer to like 4 or 5 regular full-size ones. I'm going to trim these down. This is going to add just a lovely flavor to our broth and our stew, as well as a nice kind of vegetable bulk to it on there, which I find will be lovely. I love celery. And if you don't like celery, I still highly recommend you put it in there. You can leave your celery in big chunks, so then you could just pull it out at the end, but it allows you to give that nice flavor to the stew. Here we go. So I'm doing, again, nice smaller little cuts. This will help them get up nice and tender, release out their flavor, and will allow you to get a good bite in every spoonful. Turn my pan up to about a 5 now. It was a little bit lower, but now I'm going to turn it back up to nice and high. Got all of these in here. Let's give them a good stir and coat them up. And then before we add in our tomatoes, we're actually going to add in some tomato paste here in just a second, because that will give us a nice kind of a rich little broth to it. We're going to be using some beef bouillon, but before we do that, I'm just going to start prepping up my tomatoes so we can add those in there for our German beef and noodle stew.
Looks like you dropped a piece under.
Gotta go. Underneath there. I seem to drop them everywhere, guys. I always say they're always trying to abandon ship on me. Now, I'm using 4 fresh tomatoes, but you could also just throw in a can of diced tomatoes if you want. I love using fresh ingredients whenever possible. So we're going to do this. This will add, a nice, lovely little bit of acidity to our vegetable, or to our stew, to the broth, as well as just having another great veggie in there. We're doing just a nice, simple, kind of chaotic dice on here. It doesn't need to be perfect and small. You just want to make sure you don't have any big chunks of tomatoes with the skin on it, because the skin will stay. It's not going to reduce down. And so you can get like big ribbons of skin if you don't dice it up. Okay.
Do you have any plans for any specific meals this week?
So I'm going to do a Moroccan lamb tangine meal. I was going to do that tonight, but I realized I didn't have any rice, and I want rice for that, as kind of the starch or the grain. And let's see. That's the one thing I know because I have that ingredient. So that's on there. I'm not sure what else I'm going to do for the week. Oh, I might make a lasagna this week because I have the stuff for it. So maybe do that as well. Okay. Let's get in. We're going to add in a little bit more thyme for our beef stew. We're going to add in about a teaspoon on here. We have some on our meat drippings already. I do have some fresh parsley that we're going to add in, but we're not going to add that in until the very end because parsley loses its flavor. We're going to add in about a half a teaspoon of black pepper. And then I have some bay leaves. We're going to add in about I got 2.5 bay leaves there. We're going to let this kind of stir up. Then we're going to add in our tomato paste. And we're going to let that saute for just a minute. Let it bring out that richness. And we'll throw in our tomatoes. We'll pop our pretzels in the oven. And then we'll start working on the rest of it. My can opener's in here.
You have a question. Have you ever cooked yuca, the root veggie?
Yes, I have. It's really lovely. It's got a nice little starchiness to it, similar to kind of like a potato. There is this like kind of a Cuban stew that I've used it a couple of times in, which I love, but my kids aren't as big of a fan. I think they always think it's like a potato, and I'm like, it's not. It's more starchy, but it's delicious. I am a very adventurous eater, and I'm working on getting my kids and spouse to enjoy all the flavors that I like, but baby steps. Okay, we put in about a tablespoon of our tomato paste, a good keeping maybe a tablespoon and a half. We're going to really coat this up so that it's nice and lovely. Let's go pop our pretzels in the oven now. Then we'll add in our tomatoes and we'll prep up our noodles and make the rest of our stew. Okay, so here we've got our homemade soft pretzels that we coated. We brushed with an egg wash in here. And again, these are yeast. I'm going to put them on the top rack here, all the way towards the back. And then I'm going to set my timer for 8 minutes. They don't take very long to cook. Now, if you make them into the bigger pretzel sizes, sometimes I made 16 here. Sometimes I make 12. Sometimes I make 9, depending on how big and crazy I want to go. If you do bigger, of course, you're going to need to add a little bit more time because they'll need a little bit longer to bake. Okay, we've got our tomato paste in here. Let's add in our tomatoes. And again, this was 4 vine ripe tomatoes that I diced up. You could use about a can of diced tomatoes if you wanted, juice and all. Give this a good stir. Really kind of coat it up for a second, and then we're going to start adding in our broth for this.
Question, do you make any cinnamon pretzels?
Yes, so that's actually a way we do. I don't put any salt on my pretzels now before the baking process because when they take it out, I rub them with butter and then I do some with cinnamon sugar and some with salt because my kids love the cinnamon sugar pretzels. So it gives you kind of like a nice dessert pretzel to go with it. Okay, let's add in our broth, or right now I'm going to be using water and beef bouillon. I'm going to use about 6 cups, but I've got 4 in here right now. We're going to add in about a cup at first. And what we're going to do is we are going to scrape around with our spatula, making sure we pick up all of those little cooked on delicious bits on the bottom of our pan. That's going to add so much flavor and richness to this broth. Here we go. So we have our little bit right here. Now, before we add in any more liquid too, we want to make sure we scrape everything off. This is where I add in just a little bit of flour to help bring up the thickness of our stew. So I'm just going to sprinkle over about a tablespoon or so, just like as if it's snowing flour over the top. You don't want to just drop it in a big clump because then you can kind of make a little bit of a dumpling with that. So again, a nice little sprinkle. And this is going to allow the stew to thicken up and it's just going to make it absolutely lovely. And then Worcestershire sauce. This is a secret ingredient. We're going to add about a tablespoon of this in here, just a little bit. The acidity of this from the vinegar, because it's a vinegar-based sauce, adds just a lovely note to the beef stew. Now we're going to just kind of mix all of this together, which should make kind of a really thick broth. And then we'll start adding in the rest of our liquids. But first, let's give it a good kind of coating over. So I'm going to make sure I just scrape all the way around. And again, make sure you really scrape the bottom of your pan that has all of those little crispy bits on it. We're going to add another cup of water. You could also use straight up beef broth. I'll add my beef bouillon in once I've got all my liquid in here. But again, a little by little. You don't need to go super, don't just flood it all in there at one time.
Someone made your biscuits from earlier today.
Oh, good. I hope you like them. They are so delicious. So I had like leftover honey butter from mine, and I kept dipping my biscuit in the honey butter because it was so good. So I hope you like them. They're a simple but delicious recipe. Okay. Put in that. And then again, I'm going to add in about 2 more cups, but I'm going to bring this up to a nice good boil. Let's get our last 2 cups of water in here.
You have a question? Why not dump all the water in at one time?
I find when you dump in all the water at one time, it floods it. And so it doesn't like marry together well. It doesn't thicken up the same way. And sometimes I'll add less water than I want than what I think I'm going to add in. So putting it in piece by piece allows me to know exactly how much I really want in there. And also in the beginning, when you're scraping and deglazing those bits off the bottom of it, having just a little bit of water allows that to kind of form into a gravy, and then you can kind of work it in instead of it just like pouring it all in there and then you just have these bits floating around. And so I think it just makes it turn out a lot nicer and better. Okay, so we've got part of it in here. I'm going to add in, I got another cup. And again, I am just kind of testing for the thickness of my broth, knowing that I'm going to be adding noodles in that will suck up some of this liquid as well.
And do you have a cookbook?
I don't have a cookbook, but that is something I'm planning to work on. I do have recipe cards. I'm at about 75 or so recipe cards out that I've posted for my members. And occasionally we throw out some freebies for everyone else as well. And then of course we have all of my videos. We have it's like almost like a digital cookbook. So all of the videos from our stream I have on the link on my page, so people can always rewatch them. But that's my plans to get a cookbook going, because so many people ask me for one. And I think it would be cool to have one, So, and we're going to add in a big heaping scoop of beef bouillon in here for our thing. It's about a tablespoon or so. This is going to give us the main saltiness for our soup and our stew, which is why I love using bouillon over like beef broth. I find store-bought beef broth is really, really bland. So this gives us a bit more flavor. So I'm going to mix that in, and then I'm going to taste a good taste. And just make sure I've got all of that bouillon off my spoon. Delicious. Okay. I'm going to bring this up to a nice high boil. Once it comes to a nice boil, then we will throw in our noodles. But let's get our noodles kind of prepped up over here. So yesterday I made homemade pasta, and these are pretty much I had a little bit of dough left over, so I rolled them out not too long ago, and that way we can cut them into some nice kind of good sized noodles. Using my pasta roller, I did it on a 4 setting for thickness, which is a good size kind of sheet on here, and then we've got them kind of cut it in a good amount of flour, which will prevent them from sticking together. For these, let's do, you know what? I think I'll roll them up this way. Actually, we're just going to first cut them in half down the middle, because I don't want to have super long noodles in my stew. And then I'm going to do just a little bit of a roll. That way I don't have to make so many individual cuts. But this will allow it to be a lot easier. Just make sure you have them well floured for this. And then I'm just gonna roll them apart. So we got our first one kind of done. So these are gonna be our noodles. Our pretzels are calling us, so let's go grab those out of the oven and then we can finish trimming these guys off. Okay.
You have the recipe for the noodles posted?
I talked about how I made them in yesterday's stream, so you could definitely find there, but I think I might make that as a recipe card for our members. Let me turn this off. And then let's look at our gorgeous pretzels here. Aren't they just beautiful? They've got this nice golden brown kind of kiss to them, which just makes them perfect. Turn off my oven. And then I'm gonna slide these guys right on here for it. Let's get this turned down just a smidge. So here are beautiful pretzels. And again, I don't put my salt on before I bake them. I do it after. I'm going to let them just kind of sit for just a second. And then we're going to take some room temperature butter over them. And we will kind of coat them with a little bit of butter. And then we'll sprinkle our salt on it and cinnamon sugar for those who love the cinnamon sugar one. Let's get these noodles, the rest of them kind of cut up so we can kind of dump these in. The beauty with fresh noodles is these are only going to take about 3 to 4 minutes to cook up. They take a fraction of the time of store-bought noodles. So when these go in, they won't take very long to cook up for our stew. Here we go. But you see, even though I just have 4 sheets of these noodles here, they're going to come apart, like give us a good amount of noodles here. So again, we'll just do this fold. And I will say I do the roll. You can do this in longer ones to make longer noodles. It's because it's much easier to cut a little log like this than it is to try to cut a longer sheet like this. Like this, you kind of have to slide in order for them to come apart. But if you roll it, you don't have to do a slide with your knife. And super easy. And look how many already we have going in there. And this pasta dough, when I made it yesterday, I used 7 eggs and 4.5 cups of flour with about I want to say it was maybe 2 teaspoons of oil and like a pinch of salt. And that was it. You knead it together for a good 15 minutes. The longer you knead it, the more velvety soft your pasta is going to be. Let's turn this down just a little bit now that we've got this good rolling boil on it. Beautiful.
Yeah, what type of counter do you have?
This is a quartz counter. So this is a quartz counter where I did the kind of marble look on it. I love it because it is pretty much a like antibacterial, heat resistant, stain resistant countertop, which is really great. So you don't have to worry about if you cut on it, like scratching it or anything like that. Another nice thing about it that I love is you don't have to seal it. So marble, I got the veining that makes it look like marble, but marble you have to seal like every single year because it's very, very delicate. It stains easily because it's more porous. Same with granite. You got to seal it every couple of years to keep it in good condition. And you know what? Who's going to do that? Too much maintenance. I need simplicity in my life. I've got 5 kids. They're hard enough as it is. So, although, it's so funny, quartz a couple years ago, I want to say in our old house, we had marble, and then we put in an island in our old house, and I was like, oh, I didn't want to spend granite for the marble countertop, like the matching granite countertop. So I was like, oh, let's do quartz. It's new, it's cheap, whenever we do it. Now quartz is like the expensive stuff. And I was like, it was so reasonable back then. I just remember when we put these in thinking, because that's like 18 feet long and this is like 10. It was a pretty penny. but it was worth it. I always say, I was like, it's expensive now, but hopefully I try to do a very classic traditional design on my kitchen that wouldn't go out of style. You know, you have so many people who like did French kitchens and now French kitchens aren't in style, although I still think they're lovely kitchens. But, you know, I remember when I was doing this, my mom sent me a picture and she's like, everything rounded is normal. So do a round island. And I was like, nope, not going to do a round island. It will drive me insane. I like my straight edges. And I was like, that will be trendy now, but I guarantee you in a couple of years, it won't be trendy. Okay, turning this back up. Let's add our noodles in. We're going to let these come to a good boil. And then we'll add our beef back in. We'll finish off with our green onions and our parsley. And we're going to butter up our pretzels here. But let's give this a good stir. You always want to stir it once you get it in there and make sure none of those noodles stick together. But here we go. So we've got our beautiful beef, our noodles cooking in the broth here, which will make them nice and tender. Only needs about 3 minutes for homemade noodles, and will be absolutely lovely. And as they cook, they'll also get a little bit bigger. Now I did like a smaller kind of cut, but you could also do like the really big flat dumpling sheet cut, which works. Let's get our butter rubbed on our pretzels here. So while they're still hot, you just take room temperature butter. You don't even need to melt it. You can just rub it over the tops. And then we're going to sprinkle, I'll do salt on half and cinnamon sugar on half because those are our favorites. Here we go. And it's super simple to do. So we have a cinnamon sugar shaker in our house because we love cinnamon sugar on toast, on sourdough bread. It's just delicious. So I don't even have to prep it because I already have it ready. Here we go. So I didn't even use like a tablespoon of butter for this. So that's the nice part. So got my pretzel salt here. Let's do cinnamon sugar. So nice little sprinkle over. Super simple. So we got cinnamon sugar. Now I say you got to have pretzel salt. We're going to do our pretzel salt for this one. I find don't try to shake it over. Put a handful in your hands and sprinkle it over. Pretzel salt is different than regular salt in the fact that water's been added to the salt and it's been dehydrated. It has like a caking agent, but it gives you flakes that aren't as salty as regular salt. So we're going to add this in. Or sprinkle these on, and they're there. And you know, it's so funny. My daughter, even though this is a lot of salt on there, both my daughters are like, can I have more salt? And I'm like, no, that's a crazy amount of salt. Okay, let's get our beef into our soup because our noodles are just around cooked. You're going to take your whole beef, all the juices and all, throw that back in here. And we're going to just let this cook up for just about a minute or two while we prep up our green onions and our parsley. And then our dinner will be ready to serve. Our delicious German beef and noodle stew. Okay. Let's get our green onions here for just a nice fresh onion flavor. And then my parsley. Let me grab my knife over here. We're going to just cut off this white tip of our green onion here. We're going to do a nice little slice down. And then we'll sprinkle these in. The green onions you're going to add at the very end, just like the parsley, because if you cook them too long, they lose all of their flavor. And they'll also get a little bit more mushy. So leave them as like your garnish herb. And there's my parsley here. Do a couple good minces. And then we're going to throw all of this into our soup for our final bit of flavor. Here we go. And give it a good stir. But you see how we've got kind of a thicker broth here on it? So you've got a stew that really gives you lots of flavors to our noodles and everything like that. Again, we have all of our homemade noodles. Beautiful. Okay.
And what cut of meat was this again?
This is a chuck roast. And what we did with our chuck roast is we trimmed off all of the fat, and then we like coated it with onion powder, black pepper, garlic, salt, and thyme, seared it off on both sides, and then we removed it so that it wouldn't get overcooked in our stew. Okay. Let's get ready to serve up our dinner here. Let me grab my cutting board. Realize. There we go. So look at our beautiful, these pretzels. I don't even think they'll make it till tomorrow. They're such a favorite hit in this house. Okay. Let me grab a ladle here. And we can serve up. So for dinner tonight, we are going to have our beef and noodle stew. It's our lovely German beef and noodle stew with chuck roast, a lovely beef and tomato broth, carrots, celery, homemade noodles made from eggs, flour, and a little bit of oil. And then on the side with our German beef and noodle stew, we'll have a nice soft salted pretzel with a cinnamon sugar pretzel as like a little treat dessert for it. But a nice homey, delicious stew that is just screaming fall right now. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you how what I'm making for my family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can go to that link, search for what we made, our beef stew and pretzels, and you can watch and cook along with us again. Again, we also have this recipe card for everyone on the link on our page. You'll just have to do a little bit of digging for it, but that is there for everyone. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my Dutch ovens, my big pans, my knives, my cutting boards, all that jazz. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.